Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor, and we begin tonight with huge drama across the pond. Our cousins, the Brits, had some major political upheaval today as Prime Minister Liz Truss resigned her position after just 44 days at 10 Downing Street. This is the shortest tenure of any prime minister in that nation's long and beautiful history. What's this all about? Well, hopefully, to bring us shed some light on this is Diana Furchtgott-Roth. She's the director for the Center for Climate, Energy, and Environment at Heritage Foundation. And most importantly here, you are, you're British. So thanks for joining us.
I'm a dual citizen, and it's a great pleasure to be with you. So
what happened here? I think most of us sort of have whiplash. First, we see her become the prime minister and the leader of the Conservative Party. She, of course, stoically presided over the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, and now begins her relationship with King Charles, and she's gone.
Well, Liz Truss proposed a program of lower taxes in order to get through this period of uncertainty and high electricity prices. And people fought back against the reductions in taxes on the grounds that it was not budget neutral, on the grounds that it would lose money that the economy could not afford. There was no thought that the lower taxes would attract investment into Britain and cause higher tax revenues in the days ahead. And when Britain had lowered its 50% tax rate to 45%, it got more money in. And there are a lot of good arguments that can be made that the way to attract industry, the way to attract investment, the way to attract additional work is to lower tax rates.
Right.
But on the other hand, there are people on the other side who don't like that. So when she proposed lowering taxes, people fought back, and they said this would cause too much of a budget deficit.
Well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, I think, fought these fights decades ago and won them, and she was proven correct. Did the Tories not have Liz Truss's back on this? I mean, clearly the opposition would argue. That's what we're used to here in the States as well, the same arguments. But did she lose the faith in her own party?
There were people who didn't like her to begin with, who wanted to stab her in the back. So the race to become prime minister was very contentious. And the number two person, Rishi Sunak, had his supporters, and others had their supporters. And so they said that what was important was to pay for the tax cuts, which wasn't possible to do without cutting pensions and doing things that were unpopular. So here in the United States, we are able to run a budget deficit, in fact, a much larger budget deficit than the United Kingdom is proposing to do. And I'm not saying that this is a good thing to do.
Right.
It can be excused for a short period of time.
Yeah.
They didn't even want to give it a chance for a short period of time.
Well, and it's funny. I mean, this was the same arguments over President Trump's tax cuts back in 2019, and we were told you couldn't pay for them, that it's going to be too expensive, and we'd have. But of course, the proof is in the pudding. We actually, as you said, increased revenue to the federal government because of those tax cuts, because the economy grew. That's clearly what PM Truss was trying to accomplish here. But it sounds to me like she was incapable of making that argument in a compelling way, like, for instance, Maggie Thatcher was able to do.
So the question is, what happens next? And one possibility is that former Prime Minister Boris Johnson comes back and takes over. Yes, he is the number one favored person to become the next prime minister. Then after that, it's Rishi Sunak, the person who lost to her before. So Rishi Sunak is very much of a play by the book. If you have a tax cut, you have to have revenue up front to meet that. And then there's a few other people also waiting in the wings, such as Penny Mordaunt and other individuals who might get picked.
What a remarkable turn of events, though, if the Conservative Party turned back to Boris Johnson to bring him back to sort of stabilize things.
Right. So it depends how they have the vote. So the vote for Prime Minister Truss was what was called the entire Conservative Party. That's people in the United Kingdom who have signed up to be a member of the Conservative Party. So they all get a vote. But what people are proposing now is that just the Tory MPs vote. So if the Tory MPs vote, that'll probably bring in Rishi Sunak. If everyone is allowed to vote, just the way they voted for Prime Minister Truss, it'll probably be Boris Johnson who comes back.
Will there be calls under these extraordinary circumstances for a general election relatively soon, considering the turmoil right now with the government?
There might be calls for a general election from the Labour Party, but the Tories do not have to hold a general election for 2 years. So they don't have to hold an election. I can assure you they won't hold an election now, because they don't want to hold an election when they're in disarray. They always choose the time of strength to have an election, and it's only a 6-week campaigning season.
Oh, God, that sounds so delightful. If only we could adopt that over here. We have over 2 years of campaigning.
Yeah, that's why in Britain they say they stand for election, whereas here we run for election.
Right. I guess my final question here with regard to Liz Truss's character. I know that the headlines coming out of the UK, but my goodness, the press in London, it can be nasty. And I'm seeing just some horrible things being said about her, and that it's a shambles and it's an embarrassment and it's a debacle. But I don't know, you tell me, part of me has a lot of respect for an elected leader who actually reads the writing on the wall, sees that she's up against something here, and decides, you know what, I'm going to step down and maybe somebody else can be more effective. Frankly, I think we should have more resignations from elected officials in our country.
I think it's sad that she went back to begin with, that she didn't stick to her guns right away on these tax cuts, because once she went back on the tax cuts, then people thought that she would go back on other things also, and they pushed her to go back. It's like when you're wounded, the animals smell blood. So the animals smelt blood and then went after her.
Yeah.
And then I guess she had to resign because she lost the confidence. But I think mistake number one was going back on the tax cut program that she had got elected on.
What's the timeline here, do you think, in terms of the party determining who their new leader is? When do you expect them to emerge with a new PM?
Within 1 or 2 weeks. But the first question they have to they have to decide is it only the MPs, the members of parliament, who are going to vote for the next prime minister, in which case it will probably be Rishi Sunak, or are they going to allow the whole Tory party, in other words, members of members of the Conservative Party all over the country to vote? And then that would probably be Boris Johnson. They haven't even made that decision yet.
I see. All right. And one final question, I'm sorry. Generally speaking, at a time like this, if there is a new prime minister under these circumstances, do the rest of the members of the cabinet, as it were, or the members of the government, the ministers, do they stay in place, or will the new PM clean house and bring in all new ministers?
The new prime minister will want people who are loyal to that individual. So that's what's likely to happen. The new prime minister will put in friends and loyal allies. But it's a very small group. It's a much smaller group than in the United States, where a very large tranche of people turn over. It's just a small cabinet group.
It has been a dramatic several months in the United Kingdom, and we'll continue to watch the dramatic events as they unfold. And thank you for helping to shepherd us through this. I appreciate it, Diana Furchtgott-Roth.
Thank you very much for having me on your show.
More to come on O'Connor Tonight.